Well, hello everybody, and welcome to CrossWorlds. This is a new show where we're going to be looking at the future of the Metaverse, focusing on the hypergrid and, well, beyond. For those of you who don't know, the Metaverse is the world of immersive spaces on the internet, some of them now even on the web and on your desktop, maybe even in holographic rooms or holographic cupboards of the future. We will see. To start the series off, I'm pleased to welcome to the show Maria Korolov, who is the editor and publisher of Hypergrid Business, a blog which basically tracks everything going on in the Metaverse, I think. So welcome, Maria.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for having me. I didn't realize this was the first episode of the show. It's very exciting.
It is indeed, and I couldn't think of a better person to have along, because I'm forever twittering, sort of sources and links for this kind of stuff, and I know that you do very much the same with your blog. And I suppose I must Twitter about 6 or 7 links a day to your blog. There's everything regarding the new Metaverse, if that's the right word, seems to be there. So. It's a great site. I thought before we get into the nitty gritty, as it were, of the Metaverse and everything else, you'd just like to introduce yourself and say where you've come from, because I know you have a formidable history before you started Hypergrid Business.
Well, yeah, I've been a journalist for 20 years. I started out at the Chicago Tribune, worked at Reuters in Russia, covered a bunch of wars. I've been to Chechnya, to Afghanistan as a reporter. I was the bureau chief in China for 5 years, and I'm still doing global technology reporting. Hypergrid Business is like a kind of a hobby right now, but I'm having a blast doing it. It's the most fun thing that I do all day.
Yeah, it's. I think it's really satisfying, isn't it, to be on the leading edge, as it were, because you're covering something that is totally new. And
I love that. I love the fact that I can personally talk to the creators, the founders, the inventors of all this technology. I talk to Krista Lopez on an occasional basis, who invented the hypergrid. I mean, that's kind of like talking to Tim Berners-Lee, that's exactly like talking to Tim Berners-Lee. If you were doing it in 1992, before anyone heard of the internet, I'm sure he was an extremely approachable person. Or like talking to Amazon's Jeff Bezos, or the founders of Google. These days, of course, you have to get through an army of PR people to get to them. But they used to be just regular people. And right now, I believe that the people who are building the OpenSIM infrastructure have the potential of growing to that scale as well.
Oh, we're hoping to have Krista on this show. We can get hold of her for this one, but certainly on the future one. And Justin, who of course is building OpenSimulator.org.
Krista's an academic, so I think she might be busy with the start of classes right now.
Yeah, very true. So, yeah, now, in my observations of what's going on, I should tell the audience, especially those watching on TV, that we're actually filming this program and appearing as avatars here in a program called Second Life, which is probably the most well-known and the sort of the public creative spaces on the internet as far as 3D worlds go. There are lots of artists here, there are lots of musicians here, and there is a thriving community in many regards. But one criticism that many people have of Second Life is it's something called a walled garden, in the sense that you come in here, there's a thriving economy, but everything you buy and own within this world, as it were, stays in this world. In other words, the avatar you're watching now, I can't easily transport anywhere else, let alone the clothes I'm wearing or anything like this. And so when we are, pardon me, cough there. When we're talking about the hybrid grid, we are very much talking for the future about open systems. Where, for example, the asset servers, which are the things that sort of contain the inventory of our clothes and avatar shape and everything else, could possibly live somewhere else on the internet, and we will be able to transport aspects of our virtual self from place to place. So I could give you a link on the web, for example, and you could come to either a location in Second Life, or you could equally go to some obscure backwater that somebody's running that concerns a speciality that you are interested in. And this is very much the sort of thing that Maria has been covering. And a lot of people at the moment are working in with different approaches to this. We have at least two companies I know of, for example, who are trying to find ways to embed virtual worlds onto the web so you can actually view them in a web page. Other people are developing systems where you can host virtual worlds, quite literally, on your own computers, and they will only be online when you are, and you can invite people into your world by inviting them into your computer. And then there are many other systems where these worlds are actually hosted on the internet, but they're hosted in an open system, unlike the one that we have here in Second Life. So, Maria, I suppose the first question is, as far as you can see it anyway, do you see any of these different approaches, these different avenues to the metaverse becoming prominent? I mean, do you think OpenSim will gain prominence, or do you think maybe Windows on the web will gain more prominence? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Right now, OpenSim is in the lead because it has the most vendors. I'm currently tracking more than 50 different hosting providers for OpenSim. It's got the biggest companies behind it. IBM and Intel are contributing code, as are many of the hosting companies as well. So it's got the biggest ecosystem right now. Somebody could come in with a better product. That happens on a regular basis. But right now, it seems to be in the lead. Now, that doesn't mean it's exclusive. Because it's open source, because the hypergrid standards are open, anybody can create a world using a totally different technology and make it compatible with OpenSim so that avatars can travel back and forth between OpenSim worlds and other worlds. For an example of this on the web, you can have an Apache web server running on Linux, or you can have a Windows web server running on the Windows machines, on the Microsoft machines, and your browser can take you from a website running on one to a website running on the other, and you probably don't even know the difference because they're using the same HTML standards. So I think something similar will happen here with LibOpenMetaverse as kind of the library of standards that pull everything together.
Yes, when we were inviting the audience over to this show and everything, I mean, one thing we would do, for example, is we take the location we're filming at and we copy something called a slur, which is a Second Life URL, basically, to the clipboard and send it out so that people can get in. But one thing we do suffer from, I think, with the open simulator worlds is that there is no independent system, for example, to mark a location. and have people easily transport themselves from the web or from an IM into that location. Slurls only take you to Second Life. And ironically, I think one of the things we probably need is a really good dedicated open simulator viewer. Where they strip out all the redundant things like copy slurls as a clipboard and introduce new mechanisms, preferably hosted independently as enterprises. Now, on NetSuite show, actually, we're going to be meeting Bruce Joy, who is CEO of FastPark, but he's also just started up an open source project called Open Avatar. And he, for example, described this to me as it's a system by which your avatar, your shape, your attributes, and also your assets will all be held on independent asset servers, and you'll be able to literally port yourself around with your virtual items to wherever you want to go. And I think it's based on Collada and by subsequently Mesh. So you will be able to import a copy of yourself into Second Life as an avatar, but you wouldn't be able to truly just walk into Second Life. Whereas with lots of open systems, VastPark itself, for example, you'd just be able to hop in with your avatar. Now, this is one facet of it, and as you say, it's a bit like Tim Berners-Lee sort of donating the protocols to the public good. We have nothing like that in the metaverse at the moment. Although, do you think we're in viewing distance of seeing something like this emerge, for example, from what you've seen?
In fact, you can set something like that up. You can set up a grid right now in OpenSim that's purely for avatar creation, and then take those avatars and travel with them around the hypergrid. You can set up a grid that's purely for inventory, holding your closet, your inventory, and then you can wear those clothes and those accessories and travel around the hypergrid with them. So that's possible, and it is completely plausible that somewhere somebody in the basement with a little bit of VC funding is about to launch one of those things. It's been happening on a regular basis in OpenSim lately, that somebody comes up out of the blue after having worked quietly for 2 years with a project, and then they make a big splash like immediately afterwards. So. That's very plausible. I do think we're within viewing distance. The one thing we're missing, and one of the things that OpenSim has kind of been waiting for, is a permission standard for the hypergrid. And my idea, which I haven't written up yet, but I'm about to, is to have a perms check. So if an item is full perm, let it travel the full hypergrid. If any of the perms are not checked, then it's local grid only. So it's a little bit more flexible than the Second Life standard, which is if you're a creator, you can export this. Otherwise, it stays on the grid. But a couple of grids are already using that for their OR exports. An OR is an export of an entire region file. So before exporting the objects to the OR, they check whether they're full perm and only export the full perm objects. So if you're a creator on one of those grids and you want the content to stay in the grid, you just need to ensure that your objects are not full perm and they will stay local. And I think the same approach could be expanded out to the entire hypergrid. It's something individual grids could implement on their own because it's fully server-based, and people can continue using the Second Life compatible viewers. Nothing will have to change with the viewers. And if Second Life ever wants to join the hypergrid, they can just embrace the same system. They can just flip their hypergrid switch, and anything that's full perm can travel. Anything that's not full perm stays inside the Second Life grid, and people can't take it out, which I think is a pretty reasonable compromise between not letting anything out and letting everything out, and it leaves all the control in the hands of the creators.
No, I couldn't agree more. It's, I mean, the only thing I'm very conscious of, for example, is I have my estate, as it were, but private area is on Reaction Grid, and I frequently log in to Hypergrid, usually via Jacadia Grid, and I pick some stuff up and I take it back to Reaction Grid. I put it in inventory, I res it, but of course, what's actually happening is that the virtual goods I'm being given or picking up are actually being copied subsequently to the asset server of the grid I'm actually going to. There's no single repository, is there? It's all sort of, it has to be duplicated every time I move to another grid.
Well,
And
if you place it on the other grid, yes, it's duplicated there. But if you're just, if say you're wearing a shirt and you travel from your home grid to another grid, then the destination grid actually calls on the asset on the original grid to show it in the viewer. And then once you leave that grid, they lose access to that object.
yeah. I'm just thinking, you can imagine the weight that would be, let's say, Second Life today allowed export permissions. So if a designer wanted to, I don't know, triple the price of your jacket, but for that triple price, you would have an exportable Wear Anywhere version. And say Second Life allowed it to be done, you can actually sort of see all these, presumably as you hop to another grid, that ultimately that asset is going to be duplicated. And what I had in mind was, I'm just wondering how long it will be before I see people who can offer avatar creation services, offer clothing services, and all independent services that will somehow provide asset servers that will literally service you wherever you actually wish to go.
Well, that's the point I was originally making, is you can do that now. You can set up a grid that's purely an asset server grid. And when people create their avatars and keep their inventories on that grid, when they travel to other grids, that asset only lives on their home grid. It shows up temporarily on a destination grid when you wear the item. But unless you actually put it down on a region in that destination grid, it never becomes a part of the asset server of the destination grid. So that is something that's technically doable today. I'm surprised nobody's doing it yet. I'm sure somebody's planning something like that right now.
I think we'll wait and see. Okay. Apart from the hypergrid itself, which will, is certainly the thing I latch onto, because it is like Second Life, but totally interconnected. We are seeing a move towards the idea of trying to put worlds on the web, or at least put windows to worlds on the web. Now, the metaphor I prefer is actually having something like Second Life or OpenSim as my desktop, and actually viewing the web from in that virtual environment. But clearly, in an attempt to get people to pick up on this technology, a lot of people are thinking, well, if we can put it on the web, especially if we can put it in Facebook, and send out to all your contacts in Facebook saying, hey, look, here's my place in 3D, come and visit me. A lot of people are thinking this way. And do you actually think... I can understand this short term, but I'm very apprehensive about how practical it is. Do you think this is going to be a practical solution to promoting the metaverse?
Well, two grids are already doing that. Kitely has Facebook integration and web-based access to the worlds. Also, they eventually, once you come to the web page, you have to load the viewer to see it. Spot on 3D has a system where the viewer is actually loaded into the browser. So the full Second Life viewer, I think they use a version of Hippo, is actually loaded into an instance of the browser. So so those two guys are doing it. It looks like it's on the web, but it's not actually. And Typodian and 3DI and Resable are three companies that are actually trying to remake the viewer so that it lives natively in a web browser. Typodean is using, Chris Collins. They're using Unity 3D as their platform. 3DI wrote it from scratch, and Resible is also using Unity 3D. And in the future, we might see similar efforts done with HTML5, WebGL, and OpenGL, so that you don't need a plugin at all. And I think that's going to happen. There's still a lot of work needs to be done on these. The 3DI viewer only works with mesh. They don't show regular avatars. So it's only for people who use the 3DI version of OpenSim, and they're only selling it right now in Japan. The Typodean viewer is still missing. Is also still missing avatars as well as a lot of other features. So it's not really usable right now. And I don't know where Resible is with their viewer. It seems to be put on hold for a while. But it's inevitable. I think it will happen. But I agree with you. I think it's an intermediary step. At some point, we will have a 3D desktop. But I don't think it's going to be here for a while. We're going to need to see quite a bit more work on 3D interfaces first. Because as long as we have this existing screen, keyboard, mouse kind of interface setup, it's holding us back. But technology is evolving. A lot of the 3D stuff is happening on the game side, and eventually it will make its way over into the regular adult work environment, and we'll see something like that happen for virtual worlds.
Well, something else that's happening, of course, is although we can discuss the future no end, we can't predict it. It always changes. There'll be something disruptive, but we're already seeing this a lot with like the remarkable take-up of where it's not Microsoft, but they license it, the Kinect devices and the things people are doing with that.
Exactly.
And also, the Xboxes and the PlayStations all want to have their virtual world interface. So instead of menus, you move around an environment. And I actually have, believe it or not, a program called Rooms 3D, which is basically looks like a sort of Second Life thing that is actually a desktop, which, where everything you click on, you actually code as a local link to an application or a document in your system. So it turns your desktop into 3D, basically. But it's clunky. And obviously, I can't just click on a door and teleport to a particular virtual world, which is ultimately, that's what I want to do, is have a room and have a lot of doors. And those doors I will code myself, and they will lead to locations on different grids. And, I can, just forget Windows. We'll have Microsoft Doors or something.
I think it's going to happen, but it's going to take a while. Video games got graphics in the mid-'80s. We didn't get a graphical, usable browser for everybody until the mid-'90s. So when Windows 95 came out, obviously the Macintosh was quite a bit earlier. But it takes a while for things to go from a gaming environment where all the games are 2D and everything is a graphics environment to where office workers were using mice. And I think the same thing is going to happen here. A generation of gamers is going to grow up used to 3D environments. The technology is going to improve to the point where we can support 3D environments easily. And we're going to have 3D environments everywhere. And people will be like, oh my God, back in the old days, we used to have to, type things,
Yeah.
A green screen, text interface, ooh.
Oh, don't we remember those?
Yeah, and people used to say, mice are for kids, they're never going to use a mouse, they'll die before they'll pick up a mouse.
And now they can't get away from it. But it's so funny, though. I look at these wonderful new pad devices which rest between the mobile and the desktop, and already, forget the Kinect, but we're already using gesture technology, so wipe from left to right or wipe things up and down. So that the mouse thing and as you say, to a certain extent, the keyboard is already fading a bit. If we can do simple tactile things to move around, then progressing. For example, if you don't need the arrow keys on your keyboard to navigate in somewhere like Second Life, if you could just wiggle your finger and come here or go there or turn left, turn right, I'm sure it would make the pickup of these things so much better. If you could have that on your pad device and just walk into a world and sort of flip, to shift left to right.
It's going to happen. The trick is to figure out how it's going to happen and get there early to make an impact and investment and whatever it is that you want to do in life, and get in there, get in the right place at the right time.
Now, one of going back to hypergrid, you also, I hope I got the pronunciation right, but there's a sort of secondary side to your hypergrid business site called, is it called Hyperia, which is like a directory?
Yes, that's locations. My plan. I mean, hypergrid business is never going to make money. It's a tiny little publication, very niche. But my hope is that that Hyperica will grow into something that's kind of like a Yahoo directory of virtual destinations. Right. And what's needed for that is an easy working hypergrid with decent permissions, and it'll help if there's a nice browser to go with it too. So I think that, personally, I think we're waiting for Netscape to come out. Somebody like Netscape is going to just burst on the scene, and all of a sudden everyone will have an avatar the next day. And everybody will benefit, including Second Life, from having a decent viewer that's easy to use, that's accessible, that can navigate across all these different grids, that can let you have an avatar in one grid and a house on another grid and all your inventory, with a third provider. And it's gonna, I think it's gonna happen. And once it does, it'll be too late for all of us to get in early, because it's going to be there.
So basically, Hyperica will be the destination of choice for.
I'm hoping that once Netscape comes out, we'll be positioned to be the Yahoo, because Netscape needed the Yahoo, but Yahoo needed the Netscape. Yeah. And unfortunately, I'm busy with my regular job, and I'm busy with hypergrid business, and so Hyperica hasn't been. I haven't been putting as much effort into it as I would like to. And I want to change that and spend more time on it this winter.
One of the things I say working on, it's just basically the surface metaphors. But the idea is we have say a television station like this broadcast can be found in a web player at the moment and on a website, several websites in fact. But I had this idea that, people could tune in and see what's happening on the platform like this. And then they would have a button underneath, or maybe two buttons. And the first button would say, do you want to join the audience? And it would somehow launch a very light interface, maybe something like the visual aspect that they're now introducing into Radagast. And it would allow you to, take a seat, as it were, in the studio and be part of the show without actually launching a fully fledged client. I don't like the thing, for example, that Spot On do, because they're actually requiring you to download a full client anyway, and they're simply launching that into the web. But that I would see as the third option. If you like the light view, if you like sitting in the audience and partaking in the show, then you would choose to launch a full client and actually, go into that actual destination and enjoy everything else that is actually on offer. And that just seems to me to be one of the easiest ways we can, convince people that it's worth taking that slide, so to speak. You watch the video first, then you go light, and then you go heavyweight. But, obviously Hyperica or something like that would make it perfect, because you'd, I'm talking about the hypothetical button here at the moment. There's very few buttons that can lead anywhere. But if you have a directory like Hyperica, then, you'd be able to look up the location where something was being filmed or recorded and link it in to a system. So that's what I'll do with Hyperica when you finish it.
Yeah, the problem, there are systems right now that launch OpenSim destinations. But you still have to have your viewer downloaded. You have to have it configured to your base grid, and it'll take you in there. The Kitely system is the most elegant. It takes you right into the region that you want, and it logs you in with your Facebook account. But we've had the direct URLs into the world for a while in OpenSim. It's just they're really awkward to use, and you have to set it up ahead of time. And so it's not something a casual user would click on for the first time, and all of a sudden it works. But the same is true for Second Life. If you click on a Second Life URL for the first time, it's not going to take you into a world. You still have to download the Second Life viewer. You have to create an avatar. You have to dress the avatar. And then it will take you into the destination.
Yeah, there have been worlds, of course, where you don't actually require a full avatar to be present. In other words, you can notionally, from a first-person view, just take a seat somewhere. And I've actually got an instance of my sim on Reaction Grid, for example, which I think it's Chris Collins's Topedian, where it simply loads that sim directly onto the web. So I just specified the grid address followed by the sim coordinates, and it just finds that and loads it onto the web. And it's it's a very effective kind of light thing.
And you can have it load up with a default avatar that you preset ahead of time, so it can just take people in. Yeah. So except for the fact that it doesn't show everything well and it doesn't support voice, I think that what Topedian is doing could become something very, very useful if they finish up the feature set.
Now, something that came, I do as well. Something that came up, and we mentioned this before we came on air, actually, this week, is that Unity 3D, which is used, of course, to actually author a lot of these web interfaces for Worlds, has now announced that you can actually export a project in Flash format. And although the Unity 3D plugin has been relatively simple to download and install, the fact is you still have to do it. Whereas I think as a result of this week's announcement, you'll be able to literally go to a website, and if it's been exported from Unity as a Flash file, it's going to load immediately, assuming you have the Flash plugin. But again, that's ubiquitous, isn't it? It's on 95% of all computers, I think. I personally, when I read that, I thought, now this is going to make a difference. Would you agree with that?
I'd want to see how the multiplayer aspects of it are handled and how the 3D immersive parts of it are handled with Flash. The reason people go with Unity 3D as opposed to Flash is that some of those things aren't there. Unity 3D also supports voice. It also has animations and scripting and stuff like that in there. So I don't know if it'll fully support all those features. There's a reason why people are going with Unity 3D for these complex virtual world environments.
Okay, now the other aspect of this, which I think when we're talking about business and enterprise, which it interests me, even though I'm not really active in that sphere anymore, is the continued appeal, it seems, of what you might call the walled garden. Obviously, there are some corporations where it's the firewall issue and everything else, and trade secrets, and obviously they don't want to share their virtual spaces, which I can quite fully understand. I mean, you go walk down an average street. I mean, you go to an electronics store. Now, you're not going to the factory, you're going to the shop front. So the shop front, it makes sense to have in Second Life, but obviously you don't put the factory in Second Life and have people come in and sabotage it. But I do worry sometimes that some of the players in this space are so concerned with security and their firewalls and everything else that they are perpetrating the walled garden idea to an unnecessary extent. I mean, I want to get out there and provoke the Metaverse and say, oh, there's this here, there's this there, and you could do this, that, and the other. And then you turn around and half the most interesting things, of course, are being done behind closed doors. So you can't just send people in. Do you think there's a balance that needs to be attained here? Or, well, do you agree with me that a lot of walled garden activity is actually holding back the development of these spaces?
I see it as a parallel to what happened with AOL and CompuServe and Genie and all those other bulletin board systems, right as the World Wide Web was getting going. The AOL and CompuServe and everybody else had closed walled garden communities with a lot of content in there. Some high-end, a lot of forums, historical content. They didn't just want to give it up and have everyone on the web access it, because they were charging for access to that content. It would destroy their business models if they were to open everything up. And similarly, people were paying subscriptions in order to get access to their information. If they could then leave and go to other websites, it would devalue the value of those consumers as well. So there were business reasons for CompuServe, for AOL to keep the walls in place. Once the World Wide Web grew to the point where it was a viable alternative to AOL, and people would leave AOL altogether if they couldn't get to it, then AOL had to drop its walls. And every other bulletin board provider either followed suit or went out of business. And I think the same thing's going to happen with the public worlds, not the gaming worlds. Games are always walled gardens and will always stay walled gardens. Nobody's expecting Wii or Xbox to suddenly become compatible with its competitors. And internal corporate sites will remain walled gardens. As you mentioned, they have very good reasons for that. But I think that everything else, all the public spaces, the virtual equivalents of AOL and CompuServe, are going to be hypergrid enabled. And it's not a technical issue, it's not a security issue, it's bottom line economics. If you have a high-end grid with a lot of fancy content and you charge a premium price for your land, whether it's $300 in Second Life or $60 in Avanation and InWorlds, it's still a premium price either way. You want people to get exclusive premium content for that price. And if you drop the walls, it's no longer exclusive premium content. Everybody can come in and look at it. People from your grid can travel outside of it. You lose that exclusivity, you lose that premium, and you lose your revenue stream. As long as these grids provide something that's not available on the hypergrid, they can continue to do that. As the hypergrid grows and evolves, that's not going to be the case for much longer. So the smallest grids will have to drop their walls first, and then eventually at some point Second Life will as well.
Exactly. I often say to people that if you just look at the size of the hypergrid and the number of open simulators now, and any one of them seems very small compared to Second Life, but if you add them all up together and view them, small.
They're still small.
Yeah, yeah, but assuming they grow, shall we say? I mean,
growth rates are huge.
You can,
and most of the growth is actually happening in the dark. We don't know about it. It's private school grids, university grids, and company grids, and they don't make this public. They don't really talk about it much. They just do it. It's a free software download. Nobody tracks how many people download it where. They just set it up and they run it. And so we've probably got it. I think we probably have parity in users in OpenSim grids total versus Second Life, but nowhere near parity on the hypergrid, on these public hypergrid enabled grids, because they're still very, very new. That's not where most of the action is. But it's growing fast. I mean, I'm tracking the growth numbers. It's double-digit growth every month. I think if we have a decent viewer, it's going to accelerate quite a bit. Services like Kitely, or maybe the Spot on 3D thing that make it easier to get in, I think might accelerate the growth. And something else might show up next month that we're not even expecting that would accelerate the growth even further. So I think the potential is with the hypergrid.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to interrupt here now because I've just had a message in the back channels here from my colleague Dusa Dragonash at NBC here, and she's actually been taking some questions. Where they're coming in from the channel or from the audience here, or both, I'm not quite sure, but maybe we could hear from Dusa if you'd like to bring the questions in, Dusa.
Okay, right. Can you hear me all right?
Yes. Yeah.
I have a question from Pookie Amsterdam for you. It's what economic incentive do you see Second Life having in gaining or sharing content in the open sim?
No economic incentive at all right now. It's definitely in Second Life's interest to keep the walls up as long as it possibly can. If the hypergrid gets so big that there's the potential of all of Second Life's users jumping over the fence to OpenSim, I think it's at that point that Second Life will drop its walls. As long as the erosion is slow, as long as there continues to be a world economy and people interacting here and selling things, then it's to Second Life's benefit to keep the walls up.
And they do have something that occurred to me just a few minutes ago, is that one of Second Life's major assets, of course, that is very hard at the moment for open simulators to match, is the community. I mean, yes. It's gigantic now, but there is one sense of community, and you have Absolutely. Grids like InWorlds, which seem to have hijacked some of Second Life's audience and do have that community in a smaller way. But generally speaking, most things on Open Simulator are probably task-driven, aren't they, rather than community-driven?
Very much so. People who go into OpenSim, for the most part, bring their communities with them. So, for example, if you have a role-playing game in Second Life and you rent a region for all your players and you have a very dedicated group of players, you might say, listen, we can trade this one region in Second Life for 30 regions on OS Grid. Let's hop over and make it into like a really nice big game. So those are the kinds of processes that are happening. Tight communities, schools, universities, companies that have their a set of users that they can dictate things to, can just bring those users over to another grid. But if say you could hypergrid between the two, then you can have your region on OS Grid for $10 a month, or $25 a month, or $40 a month, and hypergrid into Second Life and enjoy Second Life's community without paying Second Life's land prices. And that's going to be a major economic blow to Second Life. It will have to do some serious thinking about its business model before dropping the walls.
I wonder also if they eventually there'll be a population outside they'll have to contend with and say, right, we need to rethink. But I wonder if they'll actually drop the walls, or whether they'll specify things like, oh yes, you can hypergrid in, but you can't hypergrid out, or vice versa. I can just imagine Linda now coming up with some devious sort of workaround like that.
They might, and AOL try to play around with certain things too. They try to have their cake and eat it too. And we might have some intermediary stages like that at some point.
Indeed. Any more questions, Dusa?
Pookie asked about the negativity from OpenSim towards Second Life.
Right.
Now,
I have the full question here, if you like it. She says that the negativity towards some grids reflected towards Second Life in order to gain users, she feels, is it overall beneficial to them in the long run, as it casts some negativity to Second Life and virtual worlds. She's read some very negative things by people who want to promote their own regions in Open Grid and thinks in the long run it's short-sighted. Could you comment on that?
There are people who go to OpenSim because of negative experiences in Second Life. In fact, that's probably a very large percentage of people who are on the social OpenSim grids. Now, this doesn't apply to people who are in the private OpenSim grids. For the private OpenSim grids, they're going to OpenSim not to get away from Second Life, but to get, say, extra control or be able to run it behind a firewall for their school. And they continue to use, many of them continue to use Second Life for when Second Life is appropriate. The social aspects of some OpenSim users are mostly personal. You go to places where you have a personal connection with other people. And if the personal connection breaks down, you can go someplace else to find new people, and you get all this drama around this. But it's just, I tend to see it as human nature. I tend not to follow the details of that because it is just, human relationships. Because Second Life is a relationship-based community. That's its prime content is human relationships. And in the relationships break down, and it just happens. As travel between grids becomes easier, I think that would be much less of an issue in the future. Hopefully, I don't know. AOL people might well still be mad at CompuServe people and vice versa. I don't know how long those grudges last. Let's see, somebody asking about erasing accounts to show low numbers. Erasing the old users. I have to say nobody is erasing old user accounts in any line of business because storage is so cheap. It's cheaper to have something it's cheaper to keep an account in storage so that if the user changes their mind and comes back, everything is there again. So there's less of an obstacle to returning and just reactivate the old account. I think pretty much all companies do this right now. Facebook does it. Everybody does it because it doesn't cost anything. The storage is so cheap right now that and there's no benefit to erasing accounts. It lowers your registered user numbers. I can't see why any company should start doing that. Well, people complain. Okay. People complain about Facebook not erasing their accounts too. Everybody complains about this, but it's one of those things like the weather. Everybody complains about it, but nobody does anything about it.
I'm glad we don't get into topics about internet privacy and everything else here, actually, because all the amazing Google stuff going on at the moment.
Yeah.
And access to information. It's rather funny, I've got to admit, even here in Second Life, but particularly on open simulators, I do feel pretty private. I mean, maybe it's I hide practically nothing behind my avatar, but I suppose it's the impression people get. They see the avatar, and I get interrupted by IMs and things, but nothing like what happens on the Googles and Facebooks of this world.
I think we have to see legislation in this area about letting people control their own privacy and their own personal information. And until legislation happens, we're going to see companies abusing it because people are always willing to make a short-term trade-off for short-term convenience, and they forget about the long-term consequences. And that's just a factor of how we're wired up. Short-term pain is always right there, and long-term pain is always like far off and distant, and maybe it'll never happen. So we're always ready to make that trade-off. And so it'll take legislation to put these tools back in the control of consumers. And I think the legislation will come once there are some big abuses. And maybe if Google Plus abuses its the information it collects, maybe we'll see some legislation then.
Yeah, I tend to agree. There'll have to be something. Although I often wonder, if a couple of generations' time, they'll even know what the word privacy is. Sort of these things sometimes get lost. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I'm just looking at the clock here, and yes, we've been chatting for 50 minutes, so we're sort of getting to roundup time. Have we got any more questions, Dusa, or shall we just move straight into wrap-up?
Okay, let's move straight into wrap-up.
Okay. Right. Well, it's been wonderful having you, Maria, especially for the first show, because I really thought you better, help me give that kind of overview of what's going on and what the hypergrid's about. I mean, we've got Bruce Joy on next week, and we've got Justin Casey Clark after that, and we're going to get more technical, I think. And I'm really hoping later on in the series we'll open up to more discussion type things with maybe several guests at a time. So I really hope you might be able to come back for one of those.
All right.
Yeah.
I'll enjoy that.
We haven't, all the shows we end up doing here, we end up with some kind of clincher where we put somebody on the spot, really, at the end of the day. And I did say earlier that none of us, can ever know the future. I mean, I sort of think of myself as a futurist and futurologist. But, increasingly, a year will go by and you look back and you think, God, how could I have been so wrong? But, but as far as the leading edge stuff that we're so keen on here at the moment, do you have anything that we haven't covered yet that you would see as a prediction or even a wish, or both for that matter?
I will make a prediction. I think that we're going to have free land soon in virtual worlds. I mean, we already have that in some virtual worlds that are non-Second Life open sim. You show up and they give you a free room or, whatever. I think we're going to see that in open sim. Prices are down to less than $10 a region from some providers. Kitely has a system where they only load up regions when people are on it. And if the average person only spends a few hours a week on a region, you can get the prices down to less than, pennies a month. And once the price for hosting is pennies a month, you can offset it with advertising or with VC revenues until the price of storage and computing power drops even further. So I think it's extremely likely, I think it's going to happen, that we're going to have free land offers on some grids who will offset the cost of that free land with charging merchants extra for commercial land, for example, or giving the free land holders only certain options of houses or terrains or what have you, and upsell them on premium land offerings if they want more. And that we're going to be in a situation like we are with web hosting, where you pretty much can have unlimited land for a fixed price. And I think it's happening. And I think it's going to radically transform all the commercial grids in OpenSim, including Avanation and InWorlds and the rest of them. And it's going to, it might actually increase the migration out of Second Life as well. And it's definitely going to force Linen Labs to think again about its business model.
And we all look forward to the day when everybody has a sim on a stick in their pocket.
Well, yeah, you can have that now, and that is free land. That is actually free land that's available today, but it takes a little bit of technical expertise. I mean, you can have a website running on a sim stick as well, but who wants to do that? But if you can pay $5 a month and you can get a website up, or a free website on Blogger or GeoCities or whatever it is you're using, then it's good enough for most people. And if you have free land, even scaled back free land, that's good enough for residential users. It's going to cause problems for Second Life. I don't think OpenSim wants to see Second Life fail. Second Life is a wonderful resource for people. It's marketing, it's training, it's education. It's users come to OpenSim from Second Life, so the more successful Second Life is, the better it is for OpenSim. I think that the best thing that could happen for OpenSim is if Second Life went on an AOL-style marketing blitz and sent a copy of the Second Life viewer to everybody's mailbox and advertised in every publication and on every TV station, come get your avatar, and really sold it to the public the way AOL sold email and going online to the American public. AOL taught people how to go online, the average person. And Second Life has the potential of teaching the average person how to go into a virtual world. And if AOL were to do that, if Second Life were to do that, AOL style, it would really, really jumpstart the development of virtual worlds. It would be amazing for OpenSim as well, because a rising tide lifts all boats, and this would be the exact case of Second Life raising interest in virtual worlds as a whole. And I would love to see Second Life do that, and I think most people in OpenSim would love to see Second Life do that. It would benefit everybody enormously. I don't know if Second Life can get its investors on board with something like that. I think it should. People's happiness increases more when they go into Second Life than when an unemployed person gets a job, or East German moves to West Germany. So I think that Second Life is a great deal for people who want to experience virtual worlds for the first time, and it's well positioned to be the destination of choice for virtual worlds.
It is. I think it's, they are so used to picking out people virally. I just don't think they've ever kind of gotten the right presentation together. And, of course, the budget for what you suggested is real high. But
AOL spent huge amounts of money. What was it, like $400 million on this? I think I remember reading somewhere. But it worked out for them. They say that they made the money back. So I think that Second Life should do that, and the window of opportunity to do that is still open, and I'd be totally in favor of them doing that, and I think the majority of people in OpenSim would be as well.
Great. Well, yeah, collaboration, engagement, participation. It's the name of the game, really. So, but yeah, I certainly think I can agree that I really hope Second Life, survives whatever the future brings, and it somehow does engage with all these other wonderful things that are happening. Well, I'd like to thank you for being here, Maria. It's been wonderful having you here, and especially being the first show where we're not entirely sure what we're doing, but I think we've done okay. And I look forward to having you back at some point. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. I look forward to coming back to talk about the growth statistics that we put out every month and some of the other things that are happening out there.
Okay, that would be wonderful. Well, we will be back. This show, incidentally, folks, is going to be fortnightly, but we will be back with the second show next week because due to an error on my part, I thought I was weekly. So I've already booked ahead. And we'll be joined by Bruce Joy. Bruce Joy is the CEO of a platform called Vast Park. But more importantly, he's also the man behind a project called Open Avatar, which is an open source system where you'll be able to create avatars. They'll be on independent servers and they'll be transportable and even importable into places like OpenSim and Second Life. Now we have Mesh. So that's all on next week's show. But for now, I will leave you. I'd like to thank Maria again, and we'll see you next week.
Well, thank you very much.